The mining colony of Zarian 7 was a place where hope went to die. The red dust covered everything, and the air tasted like metal. Human workers moved in long lines, carrying heavy tools, while alien guards watched them with cold eyes. The guards were tall and thin with gray skin and wore black armor that made them look like walking shadows. Jake Morrison had been a captain in the human Colonial Defense Force before they caught him. Now he wore dirty prison clothes and carried a plasma cutter that weighed more than a small child. His hands were raw from the work, and his back hurt from bending over the mineral veins all day. But Jake kept his eyes sharp and his mind clear, because he knew that somewhere out there, his people were still fighting. The Corvin Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They conquered worlds by sending their war machines first and their diplomats second. But their greatest weapon was not ships or guns. It was the creatures they called Thrakari. These beasts stood 12 feet tall with black scales that could stop laser fire. Their claws could cut through starship metal, and their teeth could crush bone like paper. Each one was worth 1,000 soldiers. Dr. Lisa Carter worked in the medical bay where she treated injured prisoners. She had been studying alien life forms before her capture, and now she spent her time watching the Corvin technology. The guards did not know that she understood their language or that she could read their computer screens. What she learned made her blood run cold. The Thrakari were not just trained animals. They were created in laboratories using genetic material from many different species. The Corvins had been building them for centuries, and each new generation was stronger and smarter than the last. But something had gone wrong with the latest batch. The handlers could not control them anymore. Kenny Chun held her son Billy close as they sat in their cell. The boy was only 8 years old, but he seemed to understand things that adults missed. When the other prisoners cried or shouted, Billy would sit quietly and watch. His mother was a terraforming expert who had been working on a new colony world. When the Corvins attacked, she had tried to shield Billy from the worst of their captivity, but the boy saw everything. The worst part of Zarian 7 was not the hard work or the bad food. It was the creature they kept in the center of the compound. Thrakari Prime was the largest warbeast anyone had ever seen. It stood 15 feet tall and weighed more than a small ship. Its 6 eyes burned like red stars, and its roar could be heard for miles. The creature had killed 17 handlers in the past month. Lord Vex was the Corvin commander who ran the mining operation. He was older than most of his kind, and his gray skin was marked with scars from many battles. The failure to control Thrakari Prime was making him desperate. His superiors expected him to use the beast to crush any rebellion among the human workers. But how could he use a weapon that killed its own handlers? The holding pen for Thrakari Prime was built from the strongest materials the Corvins had. Energy fields hummed around thick metal bars, and automated weapons tracked every movement. But none of it seemed to matter. The creature had already broken free twice, and each time it had taken dozens of guards to force it back into its cage. Billy watched the beast from his cell window every day. While other prisoners looked away in fear, the boy would press his face against the glass and stare at the massive creature. His mother tried to pull him away, but Billy always returned to the window. There was something about the way the creature moved that caught his attention. The Thrakari did not pace back and forth like a caged animal. Instead, it would sit in one corner of its pen and study everything around it. Its 6 eyes would track the movement of guards and prisoners with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Sometimes Billy thought the creature was looking directly at him through the window. Dr. Carter had been observing the beast's behavior from the medical bay. She noticed that it only attacked when the handlers approached with their neural control rods. These devices were supposed to cause pain that would force the creature to obey. But Thrakari Prime seemed to resist the pain and turn it into rage instead. The other prisoners told stories about the Warbeasts in whispers. They said the creatures were born in tanks filled with green liquid. They said the Corvins fed them the flesh of their enemies. They said each beast was bonded to its handler through surgery that connected their minds. But none of the stories explained why this one beast refused to be controlled. Jake Morrison had been planning an escape ever since his capture. He had identified the weak points in the facility's security and found other prisoners who were willing to fight. But the presence of Thrakari Prime made any escape attempt impossible. The creature was too dangerous to approach and too strong to fight. The daily routine never changed. The prisoners would wake before dawn and march to the mining tunnels. They would work until their bodies could barely move and then return to their cells. The guards would count them twice and lock the doors. But tonight, something felt different. The air seemed to crackle with electricity, and the usual sounds of the facility were muted. Billy pressed his face against the window as always. But tonight the creature was not sitting in its corner. Instead, it was standing at the bars of its cage, looking directly at the boy. The red eyes seemed to burn with a different kind of fire. For a moment that stretched like eternity child, and monster stared at each other across the compound. Then the lights went out, and everything changed forever. The power failure lasted only 10 seconds, but it was enough. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting strange shadows across the mining facility. The prisoners stirred in their cells, wondering what had happened. The guards shouted orders in their alien language, while running toward the control room. But the damage was already done. In the confusion, a young Corvin soldier named Kex had stumbled while checking the power couplings. His energy weapon discharged by accident, sending a bolt of plasma directly into the main control panel for the 4 creature containment systems. Sparks flew from the damaged equipment, and warning alarms began to sound throughout the facility. The energy field around Thrakari Prime's cage flickered once, then died completely. The massive metal bars that had held the creature were now just ordinary steel. The automated weapons that tracked its movements went silent. For the first time in months, the beast was completely free. The creature did not move at first. It stood, perfectly still, as if it could not believe what had happened. Then slowly it reached out one massive claw and touched the bars. When nothing happened, it pushed harder. The metal began to bend like soft clay under the pressure of its incredible strength. Jake Morrison heard the alarms from his cell and knew immediately what they meant. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize the sound of a containment breach. He pressed his face against the small window in his cell door and watched as Corvin guards ran past, carrying heavy weapons. Their usual confident stride had been replaced by something that looked like Panic. The first guard to reach the creature. Penn was a veteran named Vorth. He had been handling warbeasts for 20 years and thought he knew how to deal with them. He raised his neural control rod and activated the pain signal that should have forced the creature to submit. But Thrakari Prime was no longer wearing the implants that would receive the signal. The beast looked at the guard with its 6 burning eyes, and something like understanding passed between them. The human prisoners who could see the pen through. Their windows held their breath. Dr. Carter gripped the bars of her cell so hard her knuckles turned white. Even Lord Vex, who was rushing toward the scene with his personal guard, stopped to stare. What happened next would be talked about for generations. The massive creature that had killed 17 handlers without hesitation reached out with one claw and gently pushed the guard aside. Vorth stumbled backward but was not harmed. The beast stepped through the opening it had created in its cage and stood in the compound for the first time in months. The facility erupted into chaos. Guards opened fire with their plasma weapons, but the energy bolts bounced off the creature's armored hide like raindrops. The beast moved with surprising grace for something so large. It avoided the weapon's fire without seeming to try and walked toward the center of the compound where the human prisoners were held. Billy Chun had been watching from his cell window when the creature broke free. While other prisoners screamed or hid, the boy remained calm. His mother Amy tried to pull him away from the window, but Billy gently freed himself from her grasp. Something was calling to him from outside, and he knew he had to answer. The creature had killed 6 guards by the time it reached the prisoner quarters. But these deaths were different from the savage attacks on the handlers. The beast moved with purpose, striking only when cornered or threatened. It seemed to be looking for something specific. Among the maze of corridors and cells, Dr. Carter watched the creature's behavior with growing amazement. This was not the mindless rampage she had expected. The beast was being selective about its targets. It ignored the human prisoners completely and focused its attention on the Corvin guards. There was intelligence behind its actions that went far beyond simple animal instinct. Lord Vex arrived with his elite guard unit just as the creature reached the main prisoner block. The Corvin commander was furious that his greatest weapon had turned against him. He ordered his men to use their most powerful weapons, but even the heavy plasma cannons could not penetrate the beast's natural armor. The standoff might have continued for hours, if not for what happened next. A section of the prisoner block had been damaged in the fighting, and one of the cell doors was no longer properly sealed. The lock mechanism had been weakened by a stray plasma bolt, and the door stood slightly open. Billy Chun saw his chance and took it. While the guards were focused on the creature, the boy slipped through the damaged door. His mother called out to him, but her voice was lost in the noise of battle. Billy moved through the corridor with the quiet confidence of a child who had made up his mind about something important. The creature had stopped moving when it sensed the boy's presence. Its massive head turned toward the small figure walking calmly through the chaos. The 6 burning eyes focused on Billy with an intensity that made the watching prisoners fear for the child's life. Plasma fire continued to bounce off the beasts. Hide, but it seemed to have forgotten about the guards. Amy Chun screamed her son's name and threw herself against the bars of her cell. Jake Morrison tried to break down his door to help the boy. Dr. Carter shouted warnings that went unheard. Every human in the facility watched in horror as the 8-year-old child approached the 15-foot monster that had killed dozens of trained soldiers. The creature lowered its massive head until it was level with the boy. Billy stopped walking when he was close enough to touch the beast's snout. The 2 of them stared at each other while the entire facility fell silent. Even the guards stopped shooting as they watched this impossible scene unfold. For a moment that seemed to last forever, neither the boy nor the creature moved. Then Billy raised his small hand and reached out to touch the beast's face. The creature did not pull away or show any sign of aggression. Instead, it seemed to lean into the child's touch like a pet seeking affection from its owner. The boy's voice was clear and calm when he spoke the single word that would change everything. He looked into the creature's burning eyes and said simply, "Sit." The massive beast that had defied every attempt at control slowly lowered its haunches to the ground. Its 6 eyes never left the boy's face as it settled into a sitting position that made it seem almost harmless. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Billy's mother sobbing with relief. Lord Vex stared at the scene with his mouth hanging open. Dr. Carter felt her scientific worldview crumbling as she watched a human child accomplish what centuries of Corvin science had failed to achieve. The beast had found its master, and everything was about to change. Lord Vex could not believe what he was seeing. In 3,000 years of Corvin history, no creature had ever disobeyed a neural control rod. The Empire had built its power on the backs of enslaved species and the terror of their warbeasts. But now a human child had accomplished what his best handlers could not. The Corvin commander's mind raced as he considered the implications. If humans could control the Thrakari, then everything his people believed about their superiority was wrong. The foundation of their empire was built on fear and superior technology. But what if their greatest weapons could be turned against them by the very species they had enslaved? Billy Chun sat cross-legged on the floor next to the massive creature. The beast had not moved from its sitting position since the boy had given his command. Its 6 eyes remained fixed on the child's face with an expression that almost looked like devotion. The boy reached out and gently stroked the creature's snout as if it were a large dog. Dr. Carter pressed her face against the bars of her cell, trying to understand what she was witnessing. She had studied alien biology for 15 years, but had never seen anything like this. The creature's behavior had changed completely in the presence of the human child. The rage and violence that had defined its existence seemed to have vanished. The other prisoners watched in amazement as Billy began to communicate with the beast. He spoke to it in the same gentle voice he might use with a pet. The creature responded with low rumbling sounds that seemed almost like purring. It was as if they were having a conversation that no one else could understand. Jake Morrison had been a soldier for 20 years and had seen many impossible things. But watching an 8-year-old boy calm a creature that had killed dozens of trained warriors was beyond anything in his experience. The child showed no fear as he interacted with the monster. Instead, he seemed to radiate a calm confidence that even the watching guards could feel. Lord Vex ordered his men to surround the boy and creature, but to keep their distance. He needed to understand what was happening before he could decide how to respond. The beast had shown that it could kill his guards easily, but it made no move to harm the human child. This was not the mindless violence he had expected from a Thrakari. Amy Chun had stopped crying and was now watching her son with a mixture of pride and terror. She had always known that Billy was special, but she had never imagined anything like this. The boy had faced down a monster that frightened hardened soldiers and somehow found a way to communicate with it. Her maternal instincts screamed at her to protect her child, but she could see that he was not in danger. The creature's behavior continued to change as the hours passed. It would follow Billy's simple commands with perfect obedience. When he said, "Stay," it would remain motionless. When he said, "Come," it would move closer. The beast that had refused to obey the most sophisticated control devices in the galaxy was responding to a child's voice. Dr. Carter began to form a theory about what was happening. She had noticed that the creature only attacked when handlers approached with neural control rods. These devices were designed to cause pain that would force submission. But Billy had not tried to dominate the beast through pain. Instead, he had approached it with kindness and respect. The breakthrough came when Billy demonstrated that he could teach the creature more complex behaviors. He showed it how to lift objects without damaging them. He taught it to recognize different people and respond to their presence. The beast learned quickly and seemed eager to please its young teacher. Lord Vex watched these developments with growing alarm. His superiors in the Corvin High Command were expecting him to use the Thrakari to crush any rebellion among the human workers. But how could he explain that his greatest weapon now obeyed a human child? The political implications were staggering. The other prisoners began to realize that something fundamental had changed. The creature that had been a symbol of their oppression was now protecting one of their own. Billy would walk among them with a massive beast following behind like a faithful companion. The guards who had once terrorized them now kept their distance from the boy, and his protector. Jake Morrison saw an opportunity in the chaos. If the creature truly obeyed Billy, then it might be possible to use it in an escape attempt. The boy's ability to control the beast could be the key to freeing all the prisoners. But any such plan would require careful coordination and perfect timing. The facility's routine was completely disrupted by the creature's new behavior. Work details could not be sent to the mines because the beast would not allow Billy to be separated from the other prisoners. Guard patrols had to be rerouted to avoid areas where the boy and creature spent time. The entire system of control was breaking down. Dr. Carter convinced Lord Vex to allow her to study the interaction between Billy and the creature. She set up monitoring equipment to record their communications and behavior patterns. What she discovered would change everything they thought they knew about the Thrakari. The creature's brain patterns showed levels of intelligence that far exceeded what the Corvins had believed possible. It was not just following commands, but actively thinking and making decisions. The beast had been playing a role to survive, but its true nature was that of a highly intelligent being capable of complex emotions. Billy seemed to understand the creature's intelligence instinctively. He would explain things to it as if it were a person rather than an animal. The beast would respond with subtle changes in posture and expression that showed it understood. They were not just trainer and pet, but two individuals forming a genuine friendship. The political crisis deepened when other Corvan facilities recorded similar problems with their Thrakari. The neural control systems were failing across the Empire, and the Warbeasts were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. What had started as an isolated incident at Zerion 7 was spreading throughout Corvan space. Lord Vex received an urgent communication from the High Command, demanding explanations for the delay in using the Thrakari against the human prisoners. He could not tell them that his greatest weapon now obeyed a human child. Instead, he requested additional time to resolve technical difficulties with the control systems. The truth was that Billy had exposed a fundamental flaw in the Corvan approach to controlling the Thrakari. They had assumed that pain and fear were the only effective motivators. But the creatures were intelligent beings who responded better to respect and kindness. The Empire's greatest strength was built on a foundation of misunderstanding. As the days passed, Billy's bond with the creature grew stronger. He gave it a name, calling it Rex, like the dogs he had read about in old Earth stories. The beast seemed to like having a name and would respond eagerly when Billy called it. The relationship between boy and monster was becoming something beautiful. In the midst of their harsh captivity, the other prisoners began to see hope for the first time since their capture. If a human child could tame their greatest fear, then perhaps they were not as hopeless as they had believed. The presence of Rex gave them courage and made them believe that freedom might be possible after all. But Lord Vex was running out of time and options. Soon he would have to find a way to regain control of the situation or face the consequences of his failure. The Empire's response to the crisis was already being planned, and it would not be gentle. The fate of every human on Zerion 7 hung in the balance. Dr. Carter made her discovery during the third week of studying Billy's interaction with Rex. She had been analyzing the creature's genetic structure when she found something that made her hands shake with excitement. Hidden deep in the Thrakari's DNA were sequences that did not belong to any known alien species. They were human genetic markers that had been integrated into the creature's biology. The implications were staggering. The Corvins had not just created the Thrakari from random genetic material. They had specifically used human DNA to enhance the creature's intelligence and emotional capacity. This explained why Billy could communicate with Rex so easily. They shared common genetic heritage that created an instinctive understanding between them. The doctor's research revealed even more disturbing truths. Thousands of years ago, when the Corvan Empire was expanding across the galaxy, they had encountered an early human colony. The settlers had been enslaved and used as test subjects for genetic experiments. Their DNA had been harvested and stored for future use in creating the perfect warrior species. Billy did not know about his genetic connection to Rex, but he could feel that their bond was special. The boy would spend hours sitting with the creature, teaching it new words and concepts. Rex learned quickly and seemed to understand not just the commands, but the emotions behind them. When Billy was sad, the creature would gently nuzzle him with its massive head. Jake. Morrison realized that this genetic connection could be the key to ending Corvan domination throughout the galaxy. If humans could naturally control the Thrakari, then every one of these creatures could potentially be turned against their masters. The Empire's greatest weapons could become instruments of liberation for the enslaved species. But first, they needed to escape from Zarian 7 and warn the Colonial Defense Force about what they had discovered. The mining facility was heavily guarded and surrounded by hostile terrain. Any escape attempt would be extremely dangerous, especially with over 300 prisoners to evacuate. Lord Vex was becoming desperate as reports came in from across the Empire. Thrakari facilities were experiencing widespread control failures, and several warbeasts had already broken free. The High Command was demanding immediate action to resolve the crisis. They had given him 1 week to demonstrate full control over his Thrakari, or face replacement. The Corvan commander decided to test Billy's abilities by bringing in additional creatures. 3 more Thrakari were transported to Zarian 7 under heavy guard. These beasts were smaller than Rex, but equally dangerous. They had been conditioned to kill on command and showed no signs of the intelligence that Rex displayed. When the transport ship arrived, Billy was brought to the landing pad under heavy guard. Rex walked beside him with the calm confidence of a protector. The boy showed no fear as the 3 new creatures were released from their containment units. The watching guards raised their weapons, expecting violence, but Billy simply walked forward. 3 Thrakari immediately focused their attention on the small human. Their handlers tried to control them with neural rods, but the creatures ignored the pain signals. Instead, they approached Billy with the same cautious respect that Rex had shown. Within minutes, all 3 beasts were sitting quietly around the boy, responding to his gentle commands. Dr. Carter watched the demonstration with growing excitement. Her genetic research had predicted this outcome, but seeing it happen was still amazing. Billy's ability to control the Thrakari was not unique to Rex. Any member of the species would respond to human guidance because of their shared genetic heritage. The political implications were not lost on Lord Vex. If humans could control any Thrakari, then the Empire's military advantage was gone. Worse yet, the creatures might actually prefer human handlers to Corvan ones. The foundation of 3,000 years of galactic dominance was crumbling before his eyes. Amy Chun watched her son interact with 4 massive creatures that could have killed him instantly. But Billy showed no fear as he played with them and taught them simple games. The beasts seemed to enjoy the attention and responded to his kindness with obvious affection. It was like watching a child play with oversized pets. The other prisoners began to realize that their situation had changed dramatically. They were no longer helpless victims guarded by monsters. Instead, they were protected by creatures that obeyed one of their own. The balance of power in the facility had shifted, and the guards seemed to sense it. Jake Morrison started planning the escape in earnest. With 4 Thrakari under Billy's control, they had the firepower to break through any conventional defenses. The creatures' natural abilities made them ideal for an assault on the facility's security systems. But the plan would require precise timing and complete coordination. The captain began recruiting other prisoners who had military experience. There were former soldiers, engineers, and pilots among the workers who could help with the escape. They would need to disable the communication systems, capture weapons, and secure transportation off the planet. Dr. Carter continued her research while secretly preparing for the escape attempt. She had found evidence that the genetic modifications went even deeper than she had first realized. The Thrakari were not just enhanced with human DNA. They had been designed to respond to human leadership from the very beginning. The creatures' apparent disobedience to Corvan handlers was not a malfunction, but a feature. They had been programmed at the genetic level to recognize humans as their natural leaders. The Corvins had created the instruments of their own destruction without realizing it. Lord Vex received his final ultimatum from the High Command. He had 48 hours to demonstrate complete control over his Thrakari, or face immediate execution for incompetence. The commander knew that he could not regain control of the creatures, but he also could not admit failure without destroying his career. The Corvin made a desperate decision. He would eliminate the human child who had caused all his problems and hope that the creatures would return to their previous behavior. If Billy Chun was dead, then perhaps the Shakari would once again obey their neural control rods. But Lord Vex had underestimated both the intelligence of the creatures and the determination of the human prisoners. Rex and the other Thrakari had formed genuine emotional bonds with Billy. They would not simply forget him if he died. Instead, they would seek revenge against those who had harmed their young leader. The plan to kill Billy was scheduled for the young. Next morning, the boy would be taken to the execution chamber while the creatures were sedated. Lord Vex hoped that without their human leader, the beasts would be manageable once again. But he had no idea that Jake Morrison and the other prisoners were preparing their own plan. The escape would begin at dawn when the facility's guard shift changed. The prisoners would create multiple distractions, while Billy and his Thrakari fought their way to the landing pad. If everything went according to plan, they would be off the planet before the Corvins could organize an effective response. But plans rarely survive contact with the enemy, and the prisoners knew that their chances of success were slim. They were facing trained soldiers' advanced technology and overwhelming numbers. Their only advantages were surprise and the loyalty of 4 creatures that had been designed to be the ultimate weapons. As the night deepened, the prisoners made their final preparations. Weapons were hidden, tools were sharpened, and messages were passed between cells. Tomorrow would bring either freedom or death. There would be no middle ground in the battle that was about to begin. Billy slept peacefully in his cell, unaware of the plans being made around him. Rex lay curled up outside the door like a faithful guardian. The creature's 6 eyes remained alert, watching for any sign of danger to its young friend. The bond between them had grown beyond simple obedience into something that resembled love. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of not just the prisoners on Zarian 7, but the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The Empire's greatest weapons were about to be used against them by the very species they had tried to destroy. The escape began at dawn when Jake Morrison created the first distraction. He started a fight with 2 guards in the main corridor, while other prisoners began sabotaging equipment throughout the facility. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would cause enough chaos to cover Billy's movement to the landing pad, where a supply ship was scheduled to arrive. Dr. Carter had disabled the communication systems during the night shift using her knowledge of Corvin technology. The facility was now cut off from outside contact, which would give them precious time to escape. But she knew that the blackout would not last long before backup systems came online. Rex sensed the tension in the air and moved closer to Billy. As the boy prepared for the most dangerous part of the plan, the 4 Thrakari had been briefed on their roles through the strange communication they shared with their young leader. They would protect Billy at all costs while clearing a path through the facility's defenses. Amy Chun held her son close for what might be the last time. She had argued against including Billy in the escape attempt, but Jake Morrison had convinced her that the boy was their only hope. Without his ability to control the Thrakari, they would all die in their cells. The mother kissed her son's forehead and whispered words of love and encouragement. The breakout began when Billy and the 4 creatures emerged from the prisoner quarters. Lord Vex had positioned his best guards along the expected escape route, but they were not prepared for the coordinated attack that followed. The Thrakari moved with deadly precision, clearing obstacles while protecting their human leader. Rex led the way with his massive bulk absorbing the impact of plasma weapons, while his claws tore through defensive barriers. The other three creatures flanked Billy, providing cover from all angles. The boy walked calmly in the center of this living fortress, directing his protectors with simple words and gestures. The guards tried to use their neural control rods on the creatures, but the devices had no effect. The Thrakari ignored the pain, signals, and continued their relentless advance. Their natural armor deflected most weapons' fire, while their incredible strength made short work of any barrier placed in their path. Lord Vex watched the escape unfold from his command center with growing desperation. His carefully planned defenses were being swept aside by creatures that should have been under his control. The human child was making a mockery of 3,000 years of Korvan military doctrine. The supply ship arrived on schedule, and its crew was shocked to see 4 massive creatures protecting a human child. The ship's captain was a smuggler named Tony Blake, who had been secretly working with the human resistance. He had come to deliver mining supplies, but found himself in the middle of a prison. Jake Morrison and the other prisoners fought, running battles throughout the facility, while Billy and his protectors made their way to the landing pad. The plan was working, but casualties were mounting on both sides. Several prisoners had been killed, and many more were wounded, but they continued to fight with desperate courage. Dr. Carter reached the landing pad first and began preparing the ship for immediate departure. She had studied the vessel's systems during previous supply runs and knew how to override the safety protocols. The ship would be overloaded with passengers, but it was their only chance at escape. The final confrontation came when Lord Vex himself tried to stop Billy from reaching the ship. The Korvan commander had armed himself with the most powerful weapons available and was determined to kill the boy who had destroyed his career. But Rex stepped between them with a roar that shook the entire facility. The battle between Lord Vex and Rex was brief but decisive. The Korvan's weapons could not penetrate the creature's natural armor, and his combat skills were no match for the beast's speed and strength. Within seconds, the commander was dead, and the last organized resistance collapsed. Billy boarded the ship with tears in his eyes as he said goodbye to Rex and the other Thrakari. The creatures were too large to fit in the cargo hold and would have to stay behind. But the boy made them promise to protect the remaining prisoners and find a way to freedom. The ship lifted off just as Korvan reinforcements arrived at the facility. Tony Blake pushed the engines to their limit, while Dr. Carter sent emergency signals to every human colony in the sector. The news of Billy's discovery would spread like wildfire through the resistance networks. The escape from Zarian 7 was just the beginning of a galactic revolution. Within days, human strike teams were attacking Thrakari breeding facilities across the Empire. The creatures welcomed their human liberators and turned against their former masters with devastating effectiveness. Billy Chun became known throughout human space as the boy who had changed the course of history. His simple act of kindness toward a monster had revealed the Empire's greatest weakness. The Thrakari were not just weapons, but thinking beings who had been waiting for someone to treat them with respect. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Korvan Empire found itself fighting its own creations as humans led armies of liberated Thrakari against their former oppressors. The creatures' loyalty to their human partners was absolute, and their effectiveness in battle was overwhelming. Dr. Carter's research became the foundation for a new understanding of genetic manipulation and species interaction. Her work showed that intelligence and emotion could not be separated from loyalty, and that respect was more powerful than fear as a motivating force. Lord Vex's replacement tried to develop new weapons to counter the human Thrakari alliance, but it was too late. The Empire's military advantage was gone, and rebellions were breaking out on dozens of worlds. The subject species that had been oppressed for millennia were rising up with their new allies. Jake Morrison was promoted to general and put in charge of the liberation forces. His experience at Zarian 7 had taught him that the key to victory was not superior firepower, but the ability to inspire loyalty. The human military adopted new tactics based on cooperation rather than domination. Amy Chun worked to establish safe havens for freed Thrakari and their human partners. These creatures had been bred for war, but they were capable of so much more. Under human guidance, they became explorers, scientists and artists who contributed to the growing alliance between species. The Corvan Empire began to crumble as world after world declared independence. The ruling class tried to maintain control through traditional methods, but their authority was based on fear that no longer existed. The Thrakari had shown that there was another way to live. Billy continued to work with Rex and other Thrakari as they adjusted to their new freedom. The boy had grown older, but his gentle nature remained unchanged. He established schools where young humans and Thrakari could learn together, building the foundation for a new kind of society. The galaxy was changing in ways that no one could have predicted. The empire that had ruled for 3,000 years was dying while a new civilization, based on mutual respect and cooperation, was being born. It had all started with a frightened child who had looked at a monster and seen a friend. The Warbeast that had obeyed, no one had found its true master in the kindness of a human child. And in that moment of connection, the entire galaxy had been transformed. The age of fear was ending, and the age of understanding had begun. The future belonged to those who could build bridges between species and find common ground in the vast diversity of galactic life. Billy Chun had shown the way, and countless others would follow his example. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Corvan Empire, they would point to many factors. They would discuss military tactics, political failures, and economic collapse. But those who had lived through the transformation knew the real truth. The empire had fallen because a small boy had looked at a creature designed to inspire fear and had seen only a friend in need of kindness. Rex lived for many more years, serving as both protector and companion to Billy as he grew to adulthood. The bond between them never weakened, and other humans learned to form similar relationships with their Thrakari partners. These connections became the foundation of a new galactic civilization built on cooperation rather than conquest. The mining facility on Zarian 7 was eventually converted into a memorial and research center. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the place where the great transformation had begun. The cell where Billy had been imprisoned was preserved exactly as it had been, along with the window through which he had first seen Rex. In the end, the greatest victory was not military or political, but moral. The galaxy had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the capacity to understand and forgive. A human child had taught this lesson to creatures bred for war, and in doing so had changed the course of history forever.